India Tonight with me, Sumita Karir, and joining me live from our Delhi studios is my colleague Ashish Parekh, who from now on will be co-hosting India Tonight with me. Ashish, welcome on board. All set to host the show and all set to get started?
Well, absolutely. India Tonight is what we're talking about. And when it comes to India Tonight, we don't just talk about what's happening in India. We also talk about global dramatics, everything that's happening across the world. And speaking of global dramatics, the US and China have now reached a very substantial framework for a potential trade deal. The US Treasury Secretary Scott Bennett has now announced 2 days after talks in Beijing. In fact, the agreement aims to avert a 100% US tariff on Chinese goods set for November 1. And in fact, it may also include a deferral of China's rare earth export controls.
Absolutely, Ashish. And President Trump and Xi, most importantly, they are expected to meet later this week in South Korea to finalize details, and that marks a pivotal step towards easing tensions between the world's two largest economies and to decode all the developments that happened at ASEAN and, of course, what's to follow, given the fact that President Xi is expected to meet with President Trump. We have now with us a stellar panel of guests. We have Pramit Pal Chaudhary, the head of South Asia practice at the Eurasia Group, Navroop Singh. He's an IPR attorney in Delhi High Court, also an author come geopolitical analyst. And joining us as well on this broadcast is Sudeep Bandyopadhyay, Group Chairman, IndiTrade Capital. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET. Now, Pramit, let me come to you first. How do you read the statement of Mr. Besant, who claimed that a deal framework with China has been arrived at, and that includes trade, agri, and easing of export controls? What, in your opinion, could China have hinted at in terms of what it can offer to the US to avert those 100% tariffs?
Well, I think the first thing to keep in mind is that in the run-up to this agreement, or to at least a framework agreement, keep in mind the key word here is framework, was that both sides effectively hit each other very hard on the head. You saw America, of course, using the tariffs, imposing technology sanctions on China. China responded critical mineral ban, permanent magnet ban, basically indicating to America that it also had supply chain capacities to force America to back down. This led to this present state of affairs. So Besant's basically laid out, and we'll have to see what happens on Thursday, as you've mentioned, when Xi and Trump actually meet and see what happens. But I think what China's giving to America, and I think this is very important for the United States domestic politics, is soya, the restarting of American soya purchases. There is a soya crisis in the United States, as well as a corn one that is coming. And these are farmers who are big Trump supporters. These are absolutely central to Trump's domestic political situation. And they have been very angry at the decision, the fact that they lost the China market to Brazil. That's one. You mentioned a few other things, but what America will probably offer in China, in my view, is access to AI chips, certain varieties of technology which they have so far sanctioned. We'll have to see what types they're talking about, but that's really what China will be looking more. They're not overly worried about the tariffs because they know that that's part of the standard Trump negotiating tactic. But for them, really, it's about the technology sanctions, or some of them, that they wish to be lifted.
Absolutely. Let me take this point across to Navroop as well. Navroop, the overwhelming sentiment seems to be that the deal framework appears to be a very significant step towards de-escalation. But the reality is that there are a lot of risks when it comes to implementation. And this is, again, a risk that's there on both sides. How do you think any sort of a failure could reignite trade tensions? We're talking about how there are a lot of trade tensions right now. There's a lot of de-escalation as well. But any failure after this point could also result in a significant, a situation which we could see boomeranging as well for both sides.
Exactly. See, the issue is that we've seen a lot of leverage which has been set by, as Scott Bessent yesterday said. President Trump threatening 100% tariffs really helped me set the leverage for these negotiations in Malaysia, and then the Americans got the Europeans on board. And the actions which the European took on Nexperia by taking over that Dutch company, that Dutch subsidiary of the Chinese company which manufactures chips, so that led to additional threats and additional leverage which was set over China that come to the negotiating table and agree to us. And now, but it is an ultimate game of brinkmanship, because next period chips are not only hurting European tech, auto giants like Volkswagen or Mercedes Benz or BMW, which are scaling down their production plant because of chip shortages. It is even impacting American automotive suppliers. So they have only shipped for a few weeks. So it's the ultimate classic game of brinkmanship between the two giants playing out, and who blinks first. And hopefully we have seen a comprehensive agreement, a comprehensive framework has emerged where 100% tariffs could be rolled back, where soybeans could be purchased, where America would take back certain tech control. Then TikTok deal is also being offered. So we have a wide variety of measures which have been sought. But again, it all depends upon what is implemented, what is given, what is not given, how the meeting goes between President Xi and Trump. And ultimately, what happened to the chips? What happens to Nexperia? What happens to AI bans? Do they take what happens to fentanyl? Fentanyl tariff, it's been reported that China wants fentanyl tariff to be gone, 20% to be gone. But is China willing to cooperate with America on fentanyl? So, we are in a very, the situation is in a flummox. There is bifurcation of supply chains between two poles happening of America and China. And then there is a game of brinkmanship between allies of the both sides. So the risk remains.
Right, Mr. Singh, very interesting points that you've made, particularly with respect to the leverage that China has had and has it given away. I'm going to come back to you to sort of address that question. But of course, there is the Taiwan angle as well, which needs to be addressed. But let me get in a word first from Mr. Bandyopadhyay. Mr. Bandyopadhyay, we'll be seeing a rally as far as the US markets are concerned. But how sustainable is this rally, given that it's largely sentiment driven? And of course, the final outcome can only be decided once that meeting between President Xi and President Trump happens.
You're absolutely right. The rally we see today in US markets is basically sentiment driven, and the sentiment is being guided by the statement made by Scott Bessent. US needs a deal with China. US cannot afford, US political establishment, particularly the Republicans, can't afford the soybean purchases by China being stopped. I think it's going to be a disaster in the heartland of US. So they need that particular deal. They also need the rare earth from China. Otherwise, their manufacturing engine, particularly the upper end of the manufacturing, the high-end manufacturing, whether it's the EV, whether it's the chips, whether it's the high-end gadgets, is going to stop. So they need a deal. On the other hand, China also needs a deal. They can't afford to have 100% duty and stop exporting to US, nor can they afford not to get the high-end chips from US. So I think it's an imperative for both the sides to get a deal. But having said that, I will say we haven't heard a single word from the Chinese side yet. The statements are all coming from US. So I'll wait and watch. I don't think I will get carried away by what the US administration is saying, because we are used to now hearing all kinds of statements from US administration. Let us wait and watch. So I will be very cautious.
In fact, we continue to talk about the US, the China, and also the kind of decisions they're taking right now. But Pramit, the bigger focus is on how it affects India in the larger scheme of things. Given India's recent trade frictions as well, as far as US is concerned, we're talking about high tariffs here. How does this latest move between US and China really affect India's trade negotiations with the US? Because largely most of these negotiations happen with India being a force to counter China. Have we lost some ground in terms of bargaining, given the fact that the Chinese now seem to be striking a deal of some sort with the US?
So I think with the Trump administration, Trump is an isolationist. He believes that America basically should live by itself. He goes back to a sort of pre-World War I concept of the United States. So for him, geopolitics in the normal sense of the word really does not matter. So he doesn't play games of balance of power. So he believes that he can strike a deal with China or with Russia independently of the relationship that he has with different countries. So it's not a card we can play very much with him anymore, or with the United States, at least with him. Ironically, the rest of his administration has a very different point of view, but for the time being, he determines that. So he is driven by very clear, short-term, highly domestic issues, which include things like soybean access, overall tariffs, and so on and so forth. So he's not very concerned about our China card because he doesn't really see that as part of his worldview. So the real game for us, I think, that do we lose a little bit in the China deal? Yes, we lose it in the sense that he was looking, one of the points of leverage we had was soybean market, that we were prepared to consider buying at least soya products as part of our trade negotiations with them. And it was something the Americans were a bit desperate about, because for them, December is a cutoff point, because in December, the next Brazilian crop is harvested, as well as a new American corn crop, which means the world will be flooded with soya and corn. There's a huge excess in soya products. So he needs markets for that. Even if they're not big ones, he needs to be able to declare that they are available, that I haven't opened up a market of 1.4 billion people for political purposes. So we've lost a little bit of leverage when China says that they were prepared to resume some soya purchases. I think a worse deal for us has been the deals he's struck with the Southeast Asian countries, because many of them have just basically succumbed and just said, we will open up our entire agricultural market to you. Countries like Thailand and so on have gone to zero tariffs on everything. So that reduces to some degree our leverage on that point, but he still needs more soya market.
Absolutely. So let me take the point across to Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh, when you look at the US-China deal, who needs this deal more? Is it the United States or is it China?
To be frankly speaking, both of them need each other. It is, to say that both of them can have a mutually accorded divorce with each other economically or trade is very difficult. Because the Americans need, I would call China the GC, the factory, the production house, while the Chinese also need, consumer market for their product. And collectively, America and European Union are the biggest markets. And conversely, Americans need the rare earth from everything from stealth jets to missiles to Department of Defense to renewable technology to artificial intelligence to semiconductors. You need those rare earth minerals. And China virtually has a monopoly of 80 to 90% of processing and nearly 60 to 70% of supplies. And you may do how many deals you want to do of rare earths with Australia, with Malaysia, or even with other countries which possess rare earth in South America. But the problem is that monopoly still remains and you cannot abate it. But the wider point over here is that the Americans and the Chinese are now looking to construct their own sphere of influence. It's kind of, like as the earlier speaker said, that Trump's worldview is, pre-World War I. They don't care about, great power politics or bloc politics as such. They want to build their supply chain. They want to reshore. They want to reindustrialize at whatever cost it may be. And even if they have to seek a ceasefire, they have to strike an accord with a temporary truce with China, they'll take it. And which reduces our leverage also a bit. But at the same time, India also has its own card. We are also one of 1.4 billion people market. So there's so much of data, which data is a new oil. And then you are American tech giants who need India's back end. You have manufacturing like Apple and everything who are exporting from India. So there are bargaining chips all around. But we have to understand this is a very different America compared to what America we had since 1945. This is a new era where America is withdrawing. It is deploying Monroe Doctrine, Kissinger Doctrine, and it's withdrawing to its Western Hemisphere. It's going after Venezuela, going in Colombia, going in Brazil. So it's a different world altogether now.
Right. It's a different world altogether, but when you compare, Mr. Singh, India to China, we do have to remember also that United States needs in India to balance China, and we've seen supply chains move away from China to India. But let me ask you a follow-up question to a point that you earlier made, and that was essentially about China losing its leverage with the United States, especially when it comes to rare earths, given the fact that it has given an extension on export controls, that there will be a delay on these export controls, and also the United States is also signing rare earth deals with Malaysia, Cambodia, and Thailand.
I was reading a very statistic. China has 44 million tons of rare earths. At the same time, you have Brazil, which has 22 million. You have India, which has 6.9 million tons of rare earths. We have found rare earths in Singrauli, we have Madhya Pradesh, and other mines which are yet to be added to the kitty. And then we also have Russia also chipping in. We have Australia chipping in, and also we must remember that even Myanmar, which is on the border of India, has rare earths. So if United States has to de-risk those supply chains, it cannot be done overnight by itself. There is no magic wand to it. It will have to work with allies. It will have to work with partners. And for all said and done, India is going to be one of the largest countries which has one of the largest rare earth reserves, and we can even find out more. But so we need to have those joint ventures. If that in Reuters it was in somewhere, it reported in July that in JD1's office there was a talk about processing the light rare earth from Myanmar, and a suggestion was made that why don't we include India into it. So I will not be surprised that ultimately when a trade deal happens with India, we also have India included as part of rare earths are made processing is made part of the deal. So India does have its own leverage, from technology to rare earth to the scale of consumers to manufacturing, to pharmaceuticals API to semiconductor plants. So we are really building and we are really scaling up. So America also needs India to hedge itself against China. But Rome is not built in a day. So America needs time. But China's hold over that technology, it's about processing. And why, it's about processing? Because it requires, a lot of chemical reactions. It creates a lot of pollution. It causes a lot of environmental controls, radiation. Unfortunately, the Western society, was sleeping and saying, okay, let China do it. We are not interested. But now since they've woken up, so they will need these countries which have big reserves and the technology, like we had a deal between Brazil and France for processing rare earths. So we need all these countries to work together to de-risk supply chain, just like we made up a deal during COVID on de-risking supply from China when it came to ventilators and APIs and masks. So it needs to be a collective effort of countries across the world, and it will not take 1 year, it will take a couple of years. So China is, you can ebb on to
And
China.
the focus again comes back to what's happening across the world and how it exactly impacts India. Now, there's no real silver lining when it comes to the theatrics that Trump carries along. But with the US and China tensions now easing, the urgency for the US, Sudeep, this question's for you. The urgency for the US to find a China plus one alternative may also reduce, which means that India also now has an opportunity to sharpen its value proposition, not just hope for a spillover advantage, hope for an advantage wherein the US doesn't want to go with China, so they come to India. India also now has an advantage of making sure that we provide a value that the Chinese cannot or any other country in the world cannot.
I agree with you. I think the fact is that if the US and China agree to a trade deal where I'm not getting into the rare earth. I think it has been discussed enough here. Let's focus on the tariffs now. India is worried about the 50% tariff. 50% of our exports are becoming unviable to US, and we need to do something about the tariff if we have to get back to our GDP growth, which was originally envisaged before the 50% tariff was levied on us. Now, the question is, how do you ensure that? And if US and China have a great deal and the tariff, for US, also US-China also comes down significantly. Now, the entire Southeast Asia, all the competing countries, whether it's a Bangladesh or a Vietnam or a Malaysia, Indonesia, South Korea, everybody has a tariff for exports to US, which is significantly lower than where India is. Now, if China also goes there, I think we have a huge challenge in terms of our exports to US. Now, as far as a deal with US is concerned, I'm sure a sweetheart deal between US and China will weaken our hand. I mean, whether we admit it or not, the fact remains that US needing India, the need of US for India in such a scenario will to an extent get reduced. So we have to, and you are right, sharpen our value proposition and position ourselves differently. There are certain red lines as far as India is concerned. We cannot probably open the farm sector the way Thailand has opened, or some other Asian countries are opening up for US farm products. We just cannot do it. It is not acceptable politically and economically. So we have to figure out alternates. We have to figure out certain other things. I don't think we have something like a rare earth, which China used very effectively to, for lack of better word, arm twist US. Now, we don't have some lever like that. So we have to really work hard. Of course, our population of 140 crore, a huge market for consumption, is attractive to US corporates, and we have to play to that sentiment and try and extract a deal.
Right. Right, Mr. Bandyopadhyay, you've made some very pertinent points with regards to how the pressure on India is really up in light of the fact that if a deal really gets struck between US and China, then of course, India will have to look at the kind of leverage that it can offer, that it has. But let me come to you, Pramit. Now, in light of recent developments, how soon do you think realistically is a deal possible between India and the United States? Because there are still some tensions that are persisting. Sources have told us that both sides are close to a deal, but India's Commerce Minister in Germany recently stated that India does no deals under pressure. But how are you reading these two statements, which are kind of conflicting?
So you're seeing one element. I think the broad trade negotiations or the outline of a deal between us has been concluded. We have made some concessions on agriculture that are acceptable to America. They are prepared to give us a broadly competitive tariff, especially for textiles, apparels, low-end manufacturing. And of course, a whole set of products continue to be basically exempt, pharma, electronics, and so on and so forth. So that is broadly done. The problem that we faced with Trump in the past, especially in June when we thought we had a deal already signed, is he has a habit of changing the goalposts based on what other countries do. So when Indonesia completed its FTA in June and basically reduced its tariffs on agriculture quite dramatically, he basically said, "Oh, then India is not doing enough. Let's go back to the negotiating table." What we have to see now is whether the present agreements, especially with Southeast Asia, maybe with China. Though keep in mind, almost everything that we're talking about with China is at best a framework. There's no timeline. There are no numbers involved. It's very, very vague. Even the Vietnamese FTA, for example, is sort of loopy language, which clearly indicates that they have not completed their negotiations. We have to see whether or not there's a change in the goalposts on that front. We have an additional question of Russian oil purchases. We are cutting back on that. There is not that much benefit for us to buy Russian oil anymore. Iraq is already offering oil at lower prices than Russia. So we're moving in that direction. But I would say that it really now depends on really Modi and Trump. It really it's now moved to a high-level political situation, political decision as to whether this is acceptable to me or to on the other side, to the other world, to the other leader. The instant that those two leaders decide that what they have got on the table is politically acceptable to them, I think we will have a deal almost certain to happen or be announced at least very quickly. Given that India, unlike other countries, is insisting on a legal, fully written legal text, like as if it's actually a trade treaty, there will always be an announcement, and which then will be followed by a period of maybe a few months of writing out all of the legal text. But the key is the political decision at the highest level.
It's interesting that you say that it's all now shifting towards the political angle. The leaders are going to do what's politically right for them, appropriate for them. But Navroop Singh, this is where I want you to come in and bring your insight as a geopolitical analyst as well, because the politics that we are seeing from Trump here is very fascinating. On one hand, he calls Modi a great friend. On the other hand, he calls India an abuser. So even political pundits who've been practicing their, mastering their craft for decades now are really puzzled, in the direction in which the US is going, particularly so when it comes to, the India situation. So as a geopolitical analyst, how do you read it? Is there anything to read from it? Because knowing Trump and what he's done so far, he does one thing today and then tomorrow he does the entire opposite. So what does India do in a situation like this?
I'll tell you something. To understand Trump, one would need to read, the book written by his mentor Robert Lighthizer, who's written, to get things done in India, that you have to go through certain businessmen, target them, and you get the policy drift from the government. And no trade is free. That is the book's name, and that is exactly what they have done. What Trump's tactics all about. One day they will talk about Russian oil. One day they will talk about sanctioning Russian oil. Then he will say, "Oh, India is now stopping everything." The next day he clarifies and he says, "No, no, no, no. It will take some time. It will take." So these are nothing but tactics to negotiate, to nudge, to force, to pressurize and extract the pound of flesh from India on certain trade term, be it agriculture, be it dairy, be it market access, be it tariffs, or be it even non-trade barriers. So this is classic Trump. He would always negotiate like that. That has been the policy. Look what he did with Canada. Canada's Ontario, province head put out one, ad of, Ronald Reagan on tariffs, and he just repudiated the whole trade, and he cancelled the talks, and he says, I'm not even willing to meet the Canadian Prime Minister. So the problem with Mr. Trump and his president is, they are so mercurial that you do not know that even when you have agreed to a deal, the next day he will turn up and say, okay, this is not acceptable, or you did this, you offended this, I'm going to renegotiate the whole thing. Now he wants renegotiation of AMCA with Mexico and Canada. That's the point.
Absolutely. Mr. Singh, I just have one final question before we wrap up this discussion, and this essentially is about the meeting that External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar had with Marco Rubio this morning. In fact, if you observe, there was just a one-line tweet. There was no readout by the Indian government as well. How do you see that meeting? And of course, then the commentary, the speech that was made by the External Affairs Minister, speaking essentially about constrictions on energy trade.
See, Mr. Rubio's statement today and yesterday, what he gave about that India is still a valuable partner, it doesn't come at the cost of Pakistan. These are kind of a pro forma statement which regularly come from the State Department. What we have to read is the action on the ground. Are we seeing that kind of coordination, that kind of strategic partnership? The Quad Summit is most likely postponed. We do not know when will it happen. And also, Mr. Jaishankar, the MEA, and even Piyush Goyal, Trade Minister, were very open. They called out the hypocrisy of the UK Trade Minister, who said, that Rosneft subsidiary in Germany and UK can get an exemption to provide energy, but there are different set of rules for India, where you try to sanction oil and energy trade from India, between India and Russia. And Rosneft subsidiary cannot function in India. So, that way, that double speak has to be called out. And that was perfectly called out by the MEA. And, MEA was a bit, diplomatic. And I guess Mr. Piyush Goyal did the fabulous job in Europe, in that European summit, when he called out those European hypocrisy at large. And I've heard that, they are going to diplomatically take up with this UK, diplomatically take this up with UK and America both. That how can you have one set of rules for Rosneft subsidiaries for Germany and UK, and another set of rules for India? This is not how international trade functions.
Absolutely, and we'll have to see how that reflects in trade negotiations that happen between the two sides. For now, the US is in a state of a lockdown, and hence there is no word on an official round and when can that essentially happen between both the sides. Well, on that note, thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now on